Hello. Today I'll be demonstrating the steps for creating a multimedia layered self-portrait using a online app called Photopea, which is very similar to Adobe Photoshop and other powerful photo editing software. Uh, Before we get into how I created mine, I'll be walking you through the steps of how to create this. The first thing that we need to get into before we even open up this website is the photo. The photo that you choose is going to be very important for this project. You want something that has a lot of expression, a lot of emotion. It might be big, over the top, or overly dramatic. And so I chose a photo that I thought would be fun and also get a lot of emotion or expression across. So you also want to use a photo with that there's little to no background in. So first, I'm going to go ahead and open up, um, go through some of my file choices. So you want to do something a little bit out of the ordinary, unusual. That'll get you a more interesting final image probably. And so I had took several selfies, and you can see that I'm in front of a white background. And so that white background is ideal because it will be very easy for me to edit this photo and to eliminate that background so that I can replace it with something more interesting than just a plain white background. So I went with this photo, and this is what the main page of Photopea looks like. Now there's a lot of things that you can do in here, and I'm only going to be scratching the surface, okay? So the first thing that we're going to be doing, now you can choose a new project and set up the parameters, the size that you want. Okay. Um, I'm just going to be using the photo as my um, as the size of my project for the size of my project. So I'm going to go back to this, and I'm going to just drag and drop. It says you can drop files in here. I'm going to drag and drop that original image in here, and you can see it opened up a file. Now, if I dragged another image in here, say for example, I pulled this photo in and I put it right up here, you can see it highlights up at the top. That'll create another file, another project that I could play with. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that. So you can see that there's little to no background here, and there's a couple of things that we're going to do first um, so that we can get this background out of here. So the first tool I'm going to use is I'm going to use this magic wand tool. Okay, and when I click in a certain spot, it creates this sort of dotted wiggly line, and it's showing you what it is selecting when you do that. Now, if you want to select more, it well, before I do that, so if I was to hit um, delete right now, it would delete that background, and you can see that checkerboard. So that means that's transparent or clear. Okay. But I want to delete more than just that. Okay. So I'm going to actually go back, and I hit Control Z to go back. You can also go to undo or redo by stepping forward or backward. And you can even hit up here, there's a history tab, and it will show you the steps, but it only keeps track of a few steps. So you do want to save your file a few times. And one thing that I want to do actually before I even start messing with this photo, which I think is a good habit, is to make a copy. So I'm right clicking on this photo. So this is, um, I'll just call this face. So I double clicked on the text there. The depth map, I'm not too familiar with that. I'm not an expert in this app, but I have used it a little bit, so I'm familiar with some of the things that it does. And so you do want to label your files to keep track of them. And I'm going to right click here and go to duplicate layer, and that's going to make a copy. I'm going to click this eyeball. You can see there's an eyeball next to these. And I'm going to hide that eyeball so that that face is hidden. And I'm going to put that in the back. And I'm going to actually click this folder icon down here. It says New Folder. Okay. And I'm going to label that folder Copies, and I'm going to hold, drag and drop into that folder a copy so that I have this photo to work with later on. Now, I just dropped this in here from my files, so I could just go back to that original file, but as you can see, we'll start doing some editing here that's going to be destructive, meaning you can't, um, it deletes information or removes information, so it's good to save copies of every layer or everything you put in here, I think. Okay, so going back to the face, all right, I'm going to go ahead and delete some of this background, and I think this is a little bit easier to do while the photo is in color. And I'm selecting more of the background by clicking where it is not highlighted or bound by this little dotted line, and holding the Shift key and then left clicking, and this should work until you get into areas where, like, for example, there might be a little bit of a shadow. And so if you're wearing light colored clothing and you're in front of a light colored background, that might get some of the, it might start to try and collect or bound in some of your clothing. So for example, this white shirt I'm wearing could have connected with the white background if my sweater wasn't separating it right there. And you just kind of want to go back. You're not going to get every single little thing, like these little wisps of hair. I'm not necessarily going to try and get the white out of there right now, but you can probably get most of this. Now you can see it's selected everything there. So I got to go back a step and let's see if I can avoid that. Yeah. So it accidentally just selected the entire image there. And then this green up here I don't want. I could try selecting that too, but it might be easier just to go in here, and you're not going to get every single little box, every little bit. So for example, if I zoom in by holding Alt and then using my mouse wheel, you can see that there's little bits that aren't getting picked up. That's okay. I'm just going to use my eraser tool to delete that later. So I've got most of the background here. I'm going to go ahead and hit delete. Okay. And now if I try and erase this while the bounding box is here, it's only going to erase what I've already selected. So for example, the places that I haven't selected. Now my eraser box is teeny tiny. You can barely see it there. So I'm going to go up here. It's set at 15. I'm going to make that larger until, there you go. And it shows you right there how big or small it's getting. Let's go with something a little bit bigger right there. And if I try and erase anything that is not in the bounding box, so what I didn't select, it won't let me erase it, even though I'm using the eraser tool, right? Um, so let me go back and use the magic wand, and I'm going to select where I had already selected. So now the bounding box, the boxes are all gone. But there was still some mess in the background. It's hard to see that when you have a transparent background. So one thing you can do is you can go down here on the right to New Layer, click New Layer, Layer 1, and I'm just going to call this layer Red. It's really good and important that you name your layers and keep them organized, because it's real easy to lose track of what's on what layer if you don't label it, and a project can get real messy real fast and real confusing. So I want to eliminate this, I want to cover up this transparent background just so I can see it a little bit easier. So I'm going to go over to the left, and you can see these two boxes here. If I click in one of those boxes, it opens up a color picker. And to make it easier, sometimes you might want to just hit the web colors and it'll give you sort of the more basic colors. You don't have to, but I'm just going to go up here to red. And I know red will be pretty easy to see. And then I'm going to go to right here behind this gradient. So it goes from light to dark. If you click on that and hold it, it'll show you that there's more options. So anywhere where you see one of these little arrows in the corner, that means there's more options there if you hold on it, if you click and hold. So I'm going to click hold and then drag over and hover over the paint bucket tool, and it'll change it to a paint bucket. So on this layer, right? If I click red now, it'll make all of the background red. So now I can see what I didn't erase on when I was selecting the background before. There's different ways to do this. So this is just one way. But just to go back real quickly, I do want to show you, well, what happens if you're on the wrong layer? Well, if you're on the wrong layer, Um, it'll do something very similar, except now if I try and move this around, oops, wrong thing. If I try and move this around, you can see that the red is attached to me. Okay, so that's destructive, meaning that I would have to, it would be a lot of trouble to try and get that red out of there. I'd have to go through all those steps again of erasing the background. So instead of doing that, the reason I made this transparent layer, this other layer, okay, is because when I click the paint bucket tool and drop it back there, now I've got this layer that is separate from my face, so I don't have to deal with that background later because I can just hide that layer and then it goes away. So this is just for editing purposes. So the reason I'm doing this, again, is so that I can erase, so I can see a little bit easier what I didn't erase before. So I'm moving my photo around and I'm just erasing manually. So here's the eraser tool. I'm just manually erasing parts that I didn't want to show up in my photo, and then I'm trying to get it back into its spot. You might have to nudge it with your keyboard to get it right back there. There we go. And if I wanted to at this point, I could go in and do some very fine erasing. Right, so I could choose some of these areas that I want to go into. I could either use my eraser tool or use the select tool to kind of go in here and erase some of the background that's in between. But it's not going to be perfect. Um, and there are other ways to do this, but um, this can be a little bit tedious. So we're not going to go into too much time with this, and we're just going to keep going. Um, but that would be a good thing to do, is especially if you had like little wisps of hair like this. Um, it would be great to create some gaps so that it'll look like the way that hair looks like in real life, where there's little parts sticking out here and there. Um, so you can spend some time on that, cleaning up the edges where there's like a little bit of light still here on the edge. But just for expediency, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next step. So I've cleared out that background, and I can leave the red, but I can also just hide it again. So at this point, what we want to do is we want to start messing around with the face, and we want to simplify it. So we're going to do something called posterize. But before we do the posterize, I'm going to make this image black and white. There's a couple of ways to do this. One way to do this is to go to Image, to go to Adjustments, and then go to Hue Saturation. So saturation is how much color there is in something. So if I take this, right now it's at 0 in the middle, um, so it's neutral. If I move it up this way, then the color gets a little bit more saturated. If I move it down this way, I wonder why it is not showing up on that layer. Excuse me, hold on a second. So I'm on the correct layer, right? And then I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, Hue, Saturation. For some reason, it is not letting me change that, and I wonder why. This isn't a good option because there's too many variables here, too many things to play with. So sometimes Photopedia can have this issue where it's not doing what you want it to do. It is free software, which is great, but there are some bugs occasionally. So I'm wondering if this isn't an issue where if I go to save, so if I go to save as a PSD, so if you save this, if you just hit the save, it'll save it in the browser, which is not good because um, if then it's not available to you on another device, and it's not actually in your possession. You're counting on the browser to hold on to your file for you, which is um, not reliable. So I'm going to go to save as a PSD because I want to save. So PSD is a type of Photoshop file. And I'm going to go to where I am saving this. And let's create a file for this. And we'll call it O1. So now I'm going to close this. And let's see what happens if I put this back in. Okay, there's my photo file, PSD. So Photoshop that's the file type, so it uses Photoshop files. And let's try this one more time now. So go to Image Adjustments, Hue Saturation, and there you go. So if it's not doing what you want it to do, try just saving it and re-uploading it and then trying again. So you can see the saturation. If I go to one direction, it makes the colors really, really intense, which could be fun to play with, but for my purpose, I want to play with the black and white. Um, and I want to play with the post dry, so I'm going to go down here to black and white so that this will fit nicely in with the other elements I'm going to be adding here. So click OK. And so I've got a black and white image. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to go to posterize. Okay. And so I could still do this. So far I haven't done anything that I couldn't redo very easily to the copy that I've done. Okay, so I'm not going to save a copy of this right now. What I'm going to do next, though, is I'm going to go to, there's a couple of ways to do this, actually. There is, I thought, yeah, under adjustments, there's a posterize option. And then under filter, there's a posterize option. So I'm going to use this one actually under the filter gallery. So there's filters that are listed here. This can get a little confusing. So filters are going to um, um, warp or change your image dramatically. And there's a lot of things you can do to it that you can play with in here. Um, it lists some of the more common ones here, some of the basic ones like blur, like adding a blur, making something or making something sharper. But then there's a lot of filter options here in the gallery that it doesn't just list on this screen. So I'm going to go to filter gallery and it automatically puts you in one of these filters. I'm not sure which one it put me into right off the bat, but you can see there's a lot of options here. And I'm going to be playing with, let's see, where is it? Poster edges. So right here, it sort of adds a little bit more definition to and turns the shadows. The shadows become a little less blended, a little less smooth in their transition. And you can play with this a little bit. You can change the edge thickness, so it'll draw lines around more things and kind of make it look a little more graphic a little bit. You can also change the numbers up here and use your mouse wheel. Edge intensity. So that'll also add more lines, sort of outlining every little tiny little detail. I'm going to turn that down all the way to so that it's more of a sort of a cutout type of look. And there is a cutout option, but I don't like the cutout up. The cutout option is another good option for doing this as well. So you can see that turning the simplicity down. So poster edges or the cutout filter are both great options that are going to give you a lot of different effects. I don't want something quite this simple and flat. I do want a little bit of depth to it, so I'm probably going to keep it at maybe a 1 for the posterization. The edge intensity I liked when it was low, so there isn't really a black outline around everything. And the higher you go with the posterization, the more like a photo it looks. The lower you go, the less like a photo it looks. So maybe something like that would be interesting if I was doing the just the posterization. Um, or the cutout works really well. And you can make the edges more complicated or simpler. So as you turn the simplicity up, the number goes higher. the edges and shapes get rougher and more simple, obviously. Um, and you can increase the number of levels, meaning the sort of the layers, the number of colors. So if I change that to like down here, then there's very few layers. It gets flatter. So play around with this for yourself. Decide somewhere where you would like it to be, and then hit OK up here. And I think for me, I want to turn my simplicity up just a little bit, something like that. And maybe add a layer. Not that many. This many looks good. I think I like that number. So I'll hit OK. So now I've done something that I can go backwards now, but later on I won't be able to go backwards. Okay, so after I've done a few more steps, it'll forget this step. There are ways to keep it from forgetting, but I don't want this to get too complicated. So at this point, now that I've done this, I'm actually going to make another copy, duplicate layer, and I'm going to change this now to cutout copy, because that was the filter that I did. And that'll actually help me remember the step that I did to get there. I'm going to put that into my copies folder, save that for later. And you could play with this a little bit more if you wanted to. You could go, for example, to and change the brightness and contrast and things like that. Actually, I wasn't selecting a layer right there. So you do have to be conscious of what layer you're on. It's very easy to forget. So you can change the contrast, brightness, stuff like that. Make it even more sort of intense. Um, but those are all sorts of options that you can play with. So I think we're ready to add another layer into here. And some of the layers that we're going to be adding are some of our paintings that we created. So we want some things that we've actually played with. Um, so for example, I'm going to upload this image, and I'm just going to drag that right over the photo. If I drag it up here to the top, it'll create a new file, so a new project. But if I drag it just on top of the photo, then it'll just put it on top here. It starts with a bounding box, and so you can sort of edit it a little bit when you first put it in. You can rotate it, things like that. But you don't have to. You can also do all this stuff later. So I'm just kind of enlarging it right now just so it fills the screen, and then hitting enter, which will make that bounding box go away. If I hit the eyeball, then my face is still in front there. And you can change the layer order by dragging a layer and putting it in front. So, so far so good. Let's go ahead and drag one more. And you can drag as many things as you want in here. So I choose those cool colors. I'm also going to choose this other cool color painting and kind of enlarge that as I put it in here. Maybe that will be something that I could work with. Hit the enter key to make that bounding box go away. And then again, I can move my face in front of that. So now I've got these two layers going on here that I can play with. And you do need a fourth layer. Now this is sort of, this can be anything that you want. It could be collage material. So if you already collage something into your painting, then you don't necessarily need to add another layer. But I think adding more layers is more fun. And so one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of text in here that I can play with. And we'll go ahead and put that in the back real quickly. Okay, so we've got multiple layers. We've got a face, we've got some backgrounds, some paintings, and then we've got um, this X factor, this layer of text or collage or photo or other material that um, you could add and play with to this image. So what do we want to do now? Um, Lots of things. So we have a lot of choices that we can play with. We can either continue to play with the face at this point. We can go on and start playing with one of the backgrounds. Okay. Um, we can also start messing with the the layers of the face. So I think what I'm going to do next is probably play around, show you that you can play around with transparency a little bit. So I'm going to go on the face layer, and up here, just above the layers that are on the right, you can see that there's something called opacity. So if I change that, I can change the transparency of the different layers. So for example, I can make some layers a little more visible. I could go on to other layers and change the opacity of them, right? And I can sort of go through each of these layers and mess with the amount of transparency so that you can see them um, more or less and have other things pop out a little bit more. Okay. Um, so that's one thing that you can do to play with these. I'm also going to go ahead, I'm going to go back here and put this back on the full 100% opacity, meaning it's opaque, so you can't see through it. Other things that you can do to your layers is double click the layer, and that'll take you to layer style. Okay. You could also get there by going up here to layer and selecting layer style here. Okay. So these are all different things that you can do to each layer. So for example, if I double click again, that's the way I like to go to the layer style. You can change the opacity here as well. Okay. But you can also go into all of these different options. So for example, let's say that you wanted an outline, and you can make a thick outline or a thin outline. It's called a stroke. You can make that thicker and thinner. Now what it's doing out here are these are little specks that we didn't erase before. So this is, now they were so small that we didn't see them and we didn't select them when we were originally deleting our background. Now if you like those little spots, you can leave them, but you can also hit OK, and now that they're a little bit visible, if you don't like those little spots showing up in your outline, you can erase them. And if you don't hold and drag the eraser, it moves a little bit more easily and quickly. So that was all, those were just some of the little specks that were still in the background that we couldn't see before. So that's a really useful way of removing those. Um, but I'm going to go ahead and delete that. You can have things like a glow, like an outer glow. You could play with something like that. Now you won't see that right here until so it's a light background, so it's hard to see, but you can create this sort of halo effect um, or glowing effect, and you can modify it by moving all of these sliders one way or the other. So if you've ever done like a character creation tool in a video game, that's really fun to play with. You can also do, so I'm selecting them and then deselecting them. So if I deselect it, then it's like hiding it. You can do things like drop shadows. Now, sometimes you can select one and not be on that layer, so you can see it's dark here. So I'm not actually on that option, even though I'm selecting this one. So it's creating that shadow, but I'm not actually able to edit it until I click on that layer. And then, so you could create drop shadows this way to make something look like it's hovering or floating above. And then again, play with the sliders to make, to change what the shadow, the drop shadow looks like. And one that I like a lot is the color overlay. So if you select color overlay, this is really nice because it's non-destructive, meaning you can always turn it off or hide it later on. Um, you can change the color of something, and I'm changing the opacity right now of the color overlay, not the layer, not the face layer. So I can sort of change that color to something else that I want that might go a little bit more nicely with the background that I'm choosing. So instead of black and white and gray, I can kind of change that to these shades of what looks like purple, even though I'm using a blue, um, because the black that's underneath the purple is sort of darkening it a little, that's underneath the blue is sort of darkening it, making it look a little bit more like a purple. Okay. So these are some of the options that you can do. Now, if you do choose to do some styles, it'll show effects. It'll have a sort of a drop-down menu, and then you can see the ones that you're doing. So these are all the ones that I messed with, and then I can select or deselect them at will, and basically anything I touched will come up on this option. So that's kind of fun to play with. Um, so we've introduced you to filters. And so these are all different things. The filter gallery are many, many different options that you can play with to mess with your portrait, the appearance of a layer. Um, hit X instead of OK if you don't want to use one of those options. Um, we can use layer styles to alter them, and we can also um, use adjustments, which these are destructive edits. So if you do use any of these adjustment layers, if you use any of these adjustment options to edit a layer, it will permanently alter that layer, and you won't be able to get back to it unless you make a copy. So right now I haven't done anything destructive this layer because I've just done effects, layer styles on top of what I did before with the cutout. And then next, now I'm not just going to do that just to the surface layer. There's things that I want to do in the background too. So for example, let's hide the face for right now. And let's mess with the background. I like the way that these sort of cloudier shapes are sort of covering this layer behind it. We could also sort of move the layers. So now you can just barely see the cloudy layer behind there. Um, the text, what I want to do with that is um, I'm on that layer and I haven't changed the name of all of these layers, so um, I should have done that right away after uploading them here. So I'm going to change that to the acrylic layer. That's the abstract painting that I did with acrylic paint. This is the watercolor. And then this is just text. So with the text, a couple of options that I can do with that is, for example, I can um, do some adjustments, like for example, maybe I want to, or actually edit, maybe I want to do a transform and I just want to flip it. So now it's turned around, right? So I like using text sometimes in a way that is not going to be easy to read. I can also go into, and let's make this layer a little bit easier to see by moving it up front. Okay. And one thing I could do is go to edit, or no, adjustments, and I could invert. So that will change it to white text on a black background. So that's kind of interesting. Um, and what does that look like now behind there? That looks kind of cool. I think it looks more interesting when it's sort of behind something else. And you can see that by putting it behind more layers, it gets harder and harder to see. I don't like it necessarily that prominent though. I like it being sort of blended into the background a little bit more. Um, another thing that we could do is we could actually go in here and say, let's say I just want the text and I don't want the background. Well, it would be pretty difficult to erase all the background from that layer. One thing we could do is select is hit the select key, and then let's do color range. So I'm going to make this fuzziness all the way up. So that means like how forgiving it is, meaning how close to the color that you're trying to pick it's going to select. So if I hit OK there, it's selecting everything that is, let me go back just one more time and show you. It should be selecting everything that's close to one of the colors that's in that layer. Okay, so select color range, and there we go. I don't know why it's still using the eraser tool. Ah, so if you get something where you're trying to delete something and it says smart object must be, so that is something where you could edit that layer in a separate window as a smart object. So I'm actually going to right click on this and go to rasterize, which means flatten. And let's see what it is saving. So if I click delete, it deletes just the text. Okay. So I'm going to hit Control Z or go back because I want to delete the background. So I can go to select, then inverse, and now it's selecting everything but the white text. Okay, so now if I hit delete, you can still see the white text. And then to get the bounding box or little ant lines to go away, I can either use magic wand or this marquee tool, which also makes a little dotted line box. And I can just select in there, and now the bounding box goes away. So if I bring this layer back, so now I like the way that that white text looks like on that darker background. So that's looking kind of fun. I'm losing this watercolor layer here though. So maybe I want to make that one a little less transparent. And then the last thing I think I want to show you is how to do something called a mask. So this is a little more advanced. I'm going to go back to the face option. Now that text, I've done destructive edits to, so I should have gone back and made a copy of that. Fortunately, I still have the file that I can load in here, but I wish I had made a copy of that and put it in my copy folder because um, the deleting the background is a destructive edit, meaning that I can't put the background back easily. So I'd have to go back through all those steps. So I don't really want to do that, and I should have saved a copy of that just in case. But we're gonna keep moving forward. So a couple of things, options that I have here, and that's interesting. Hmm. Ah, I see now. So I was wondering why I can see the checkerboard through here, and that's because I don't have, I played with the transparency of all these layers, right? So and the red layer is hidden, right? So you can see how when I make the red layer not hidden or visible, it sort of adds a warmth of redness to the background, which, you know, you might like, you might not like, but that's fun that you can do that. But if I wanted to get rid of that checkerboard, that transparency, I do need to add a layer back here that's going to be just called background. And I'm going to go to my paint bucket tool, and I can swap the white for the red by hitting these arrows here. Now the white is in front, it's overlapping the red, so that means I'm going to drop white in that layer. And I dropped it not like it didn't look like I was on that layer, right? But I've selected that layer, so when I do the paint bucket tool, it's just going to fill that whole layer with white because there is nothing else in there. If I tried to do that on my face, obviously, right, like it's only going to cover a part of that, and that would be a destructive edit if I did that right there. So anyway, the last thing that I want to show you is something called a mask. And if I click add raster mask, so this is the mask option down here. So now what's in this little window is anything that you would be able to see through. So you can only do white and black or white and gray when you're doing this. And let's go to paintbrush. So my paintbrush is right here. So check this out. Now let's make this paintbrush just a little bit bigger. Something like that, not too big. And you can zoom in and out here, holding Alt and do mouse wheel. Mm, 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 mm. So let's say I want the text to show up in my mouth, and I'm not doing a super good job of painting close to the mouth so it looks good, but just as a quick demonstration. Now you can see the text behind my mouth. That's different from deleting it though, because that layer is still there. I've just covered over it. I've painted over it um, to create a mask where this is everything that I haven't painted on this layer um, is masking or covering the layer behind it. So that's kind of a fun way where you could make something just a part of a layer invisible rather than that entire layer. And the reason this is all showing up white right now is because I've got that outer glow turned on. If I turn that outer glow off, then you'll see that it's going right through into the background, okay? So mask tools are really fun to play with because it allows you to sort of determine what you want to see through. If you want just a part of something to be transparent, you could have a lot of fun with that. And so I think I want to stop there. And we didn't really get into editing the painting layers or editing the text too much more, doing more than this. Um, and I'm going to go back a couple of layers just to, that face was looking a little scary right there. Um, but I wanted to show off some of these tools, the filter, the layer styles or layer effects, and the adjustment options so that you were aware of some of the tools that you could play with when you're using the Photoshop or Photopea, which is very similar to Photoshop. I hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know if you have any questions. Take care.